BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I will be discussing a new Zodiac Killer suspect, re-examining the Zodiac Killer's timeline for November of 1969, and continuing with the book Flirting with the Executioner. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. Firstly, there is a new post available on zodiackiller.com, and it's called The Vintage Vallejo. There is a new map that was created of the Zodiac Killer crime scenes by Tom Voigt, and it has the tagline here: I created this image to help orient case enthusiasts with the area I call Zodiac Ground Zero, otherwise known as Vallejo, California. The Zodiac Killer's crime scene at Lake Herman Road is out of the picture. And this is an interactive map where you can zoom in and you can see all the locations very closely, but out of fairness to Tom Voigt, I'm only going to post the full image here because I want everybody to go over to his website and you can do the closer examinations over there. One more time, available at zodiackiller.com, and this was the post from October 26th of 2025. Now, last week on Zodiac Monday, I was talking to you guys about a new Zodiac Killer suspect. The problem was, we didn't know his name, and his name was simply just listed as Suspect Joost in a letter from Paul Avery to Sherwood Morrill, the handwriting expert, and it appeared that the samples of this suspect's handwriting had been taken and compared. But who was this Suspect Joost? Well, I brought up two possibilities. One was a man named William Edward Joost from San Francisco, and he also had a son named William Edward Jr. who went to Pomona College, which would be to the south. However, before we can truly evaluate this Suspect Joost, we had to figure out who he was. And I have to give a shout out to Justice, who sent me a list of possible contenders for being the Suspect Joost who is mentioned in Paul Avery's letter, and one of them was still alive. He was the one that I found to be the most fascinating. But I also have to give a shout out to Brisk G5H, who asked me, look up Dr. Joost Sluis. Not much info on him, one newspaper clipping and a PDF file. He had ties to UC Berkeley and lived close by to the crime scenes. And as you see, this is something that was shared by one of the listeners. So if you guys have any ideas for future episodes of Black Box Online Radio, or anything you want to share about the Zodiac Killer, you can put it in the comments section down below. blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, also on Facebook and Instagram. blackboxned88 on Instagram. And your material might be worked into a future episode of Zodiac Monday. So I decided to see, who is this Dr. Joost Sluis? Well, the Joost that I was talking about last week, they were of German descent. And I was listening to an episode of the Zodcast hosted by Drew Beeson, and he was saying the name is not pronounced Joost, it's pronounced Joost. I'm going to try my best with pronunciations here because we're going across a lot of different country lines, and one of them will be the Netherlands. This individual, Dr. Joost Sluis, is from the Netherlands, and he was born there in 1923. So we're dealing with, most likely, if he were the Zodiac Killer, somebody who would be 46 years old, and I don't think that that's impossible. It's a little bit on the older side, and there are some things that stand out about him because he was mentioned in the papers for a lot of different reasons. In addition to being a medical doctor, he was also a political activist. It might even be fair to say that he was a radical. And the article that was written about him was in the Santa Cruz Sentinel on March 14th of 1969. Dr. Joost Sluis was president of the Foundation for Education Against Totalitarianism, and he was called to speak at the San Lorenzo Valley Republican Women Federation on Wednesday. And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, that doesn't exactly seem like what we would expect for the Zodiac Killer, but I suppose that anything is possible. Dr. Joost Sluis was born in Holland, also known as the Netherlands, and he immigrated to the United States in 1935, and he became a citizen of this country while serving in the Navy in World War II. He attended Calvin College and received a degree in his Master of Physical Biology, and then his MD from Harvard, and then he went on to practice in San Francisco. So this guy was Dutch-born, came to the United States at a young age, fought in World War II in the Navy, and then he goes on to get a medical degree from Harvard nonetheless, practicing in San Francisco. And as you see very clearly from this article, in 1969, he is in the Bay Area and in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there are some immediate things that already stand out to me. Firstly, and like I said, 46, 47, even 48 years old, that's not impossible for a Zodiac Killer suspect. Harvard educated and a medical doctor. Well, if that's the case, we have to go back to all of the things that I've said about other Zodiac Killer suspects who were medical doctors. Where is the evidence that the Zodiac Killer was a medical doctor? Where was the evidence that the Zodiac had any medical knowledge at all? Because I've been very critical of another Zodiac Killer suspect named Dr. George Hill Hodel for all of these reasons. When the Zodiac Killer attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, he tied them up and he stabbed them, and both victims lived long enough to tell the story to the police officers, which created more evidence. They were even able to provide details that gave us the famous illustrations of the Zodiac Killer's hooded costume. I mean, a medical doctor? He didn't show an ounce of medical knowledge at Lake Berryessa. Now, some people like to say, well, that's because the Zodiac Killer was faking it. He wanted them to live to tell the story of the costume. Well, not only is that an assumption, it doesn't refute the point that there was no medical knowledge displayed. This guy was very rough. He didn't do anything specific, anything strategic at Lake Berryessa. He tied them up and he stabbed them in the back. I mean, that is a big strike against anybody who's going to be a medical doctor, being accused of being the Zodiac Killer, and a Harvard med graduate all the same. But in terms of strong points, I mean, he was in the Navy in World War II. He could have learned about things like coding. Some of the Zodiac Killer's bizarre verbiage has been used in letters that could possibly be tied to the Navy. And I want to give credit where credit is due. And to be honest, this isn't even the most direct candidacy trying to implicate this guy as being the Zodiac Killer. This is mostly just looking at the possibility of, was he Paul Avery's suspect? And I found that there was something that was very interesting about Dr. Joost Sluis, and that is that he was, as I said, somewhat of a political radical, and he was actually kicked out of Guyana. And there's a New York Times article that was discussing this that is saying something to the effect of that there were U.S. citizens who were in British Guiana at the time, and they were asked to leave the country. And this was in 1962, and it seems like he was, well, I'll just go to the article and read it here. And it's talking about how there were undesirables who encouraged the people to disturb the peace and incite others to commit acts of violence. And the government made a decision to ask Dr. Joost Sluis, a United States surgeon, to leave the country. The Home Minister charged that Dr. Sluis had been associating with persons who were directly and indirectly responsible for the recent civil disturbances, during which arson, looting, burglary, homicide, and other offenses were committed. And once again, this was from the New York Times, March 11th, 1962. And I'm just thinking, I mean, this guy sounds like he has his own place in the true crime world, but that also doesn't necessarily sound like something Zodiac related. But as you heard, he is someone who was born in the Netherlands, moving to different parts of the world. To all the people out there who think that the Zodiac Killer was not American born, this could be your guy. To all of the people out there who think that the Zodiac was misspelling words because he was using things from his first language and he was modifying them for his own specific reasons. I mean, control spelled with two O's, control. And it was just some kind of creative idea that he had from a previous language that he had learned. This could be your guy. I absolutely think that Dr. Joost Sluis would have known how to spell somebody who was not only a college graduate, not only a medical school graduate, not only Harvard educated, but he was a surgeon. I think that he knew how to spell, but he would have had to have done that either intentionally or he had a very, very severe problem with languages, like we've talked about mild dyslexia in the past. But what do you think about Dr. Joost Sluis? I mean, I do think he resembles the composite sketch to a certain degree, but so does everyone. I mean, I really do mean that. Most people resemble the composite sketch back in 1969. I think he's a little bit older. I don't necessarily see medical knowledge in the Zodiac Killer's actions and activities, but I mean, this could be something that what Paul Avery picked up on, and he might be the type of person that Paul Avery would zone in on, somebody who had not exactly a criminal past in the United States, but kicked out of Guyana for political activism, radical behaviors, inciting violence, and so on. All right, maybe Paul Avery knew something and he got suspicious about this guy, and he wanted Sherwood Morrill to take a look at him. What do you think about Dr. Joost Sluis as a Zodiac Killer suspect? And I would like to move on to something else that was shared in one of the Zodiac Killer Facebook groups, and that was the Zodiac Killer and Me. And this is going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer's actions and activities in November of 1969, because the Zodiac Killer commits all of his murders, all of his confirmed murders, between December 20th of 1968 and October 11th of 1969. And an article came out in a publication called The Lantern, the San Francisco UPI, that says, Killer claims 7 are dead. And I think that this is a really interesting news article from the Contemporary Times. The Zodiac Killer broke his silence Tuesday to boast in letters and cryptograms that he now has murdered 7 people. Okay, this is November of 1969, and what this is going to refer to is the Zodiac Killer is now writing letters in November of 69, November 8th, and November 9th. We would have the dripping pen card, the 340 cipher, and then the 7-page letter, respectively. So this is breaking a silence, but the Zodiac Killer really was not a very frequent communicator. And excuse me if I misstate anything, I'm going to try my best here. But the Zodiac Killer sends his first letters in July of 69. Really, let's go back to July 4th of 1969, the Blue Rock Spring shooting. Then the Zodiac Killer makes a phone call on July 5th of 1969 at 12:40 in the morning. Then the Zodiac Killer waits 3 weeks, and he writes his letters and the 408 cipher, July 31st, 1969. Then we have the August 4th, 1969 Good Times in Vallejo letter. Then the Zodiac Killer is either not sending letters, or maybe something has not been received or attributed to him. In September of 1969, we have the Lake Berryessa stabbing, where the Zodiac wrote a message on a car door and made a phone call. Then October of 1969, we have the Stein murder, and the Zodiac wrote a letter after the Stein murder with a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. I'm the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington and Maple. And then the Zodiac is also waiting about not quite 1 month, it's less than 1 month to mail these 2 letters, which happened on November 8th and November 9th of 1969. Very, very odd times to mail letters. Some very irregular things with the timeline. But what stands out to me is that's not really the Zodiac not breaking his silence. That's just typical Zodiac behavior. I'm going to read that introductory sentence for you again. The Zodiac Killer broke his silence Tuesday to boast in his letters and cryptograms that he has now murdered 7 people. No, the Zodiac is not a very frequent communicator. When people first start looking at the Zodiac Killer mystery, they might think the Zodiac Killer's writing a letter 2 times a week or something. No, absolutely not. The Zodiac sent letters much less frequently than that. But let's keep going here with this article. Killer claims 7 are dead. 2 letters and a cryptogram to the San Francisco Chronicle, starting with the now familiar salutation, "This is the Zodiac speaking," said. Up to the end of October, I have killed 7 people. I have grown rather angry with the police for telling lies about me. I shall no longer announce to anyone when I commit my murders. They shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents. Zodiac had previously been connected to 5 murders in the San Francisco Bay Area since last December. The letters did not specify the 2 additional killings, though they suggested that the murders were the stabbings of 2 teenage girls in San Jose, California, 3 months ago that had not been previously attributed to the Zodiac. Zodiac's letters indicated the 2 additional killings occurred in August, when the San Jose murders took place. Along with the letters was another piece from the shirt of Paul Stine, a cab driver, killed October 11th in San Francisco. Despite the apparent references to the San Jose killings, San Jose Chief of Detectives Barton Collins said he doubted they were the work of the Zodiac. He said that the Zodiac would have wanted to take credit for the slayings earlier. The 2 San Jose girls were Deborah Furlong and Kathleen Snoozy, ages 14 and 15 respectively, and they were stabbed to death on August 3rd of 1969. Zodiac had previously claimed responsibility for the killings of Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday, who were 16 and 17 years old, boyfriend and girlfriend last December, about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco. Darlene Farron, who was aged 22, on July 5th near Vallejo, California, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, who was 22, on September 27th in Napa, north of Vallejo, and of course Paul Stine. The letter Tuesday was the latest in a series of boasting notes and letters from the Zodiac since last August. One of the previous notes contained a chilling warning. School children are nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, just shoot out the front tires, and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Okay, and the title of this article is Killer Claims 7 Are Dead from the Lantern San Francisco UPI. Okay, now I have a couple responses to this right here. You might be thinking something about the Snoozy and Furlong murders, that the chief of detectives in San Jose is saying that he does not believe that that was Zodiac related because the Zodiac didn't take credit for it. I am so divided on that. I mean, he didn't demonstrate anything during that time in August of 69 that he was responsible for the Snoozy and Furlong murders. Well, firstly, the Zodiac Killer was very unpredictable. The Zodiac Killer didn't necessarily follow any specific pattern. I just talked to you about the mailing dates. They are very unpredictable, and they're also very infrequent. So, it wouldn't surprise me if the Zodiac held back information. And some of you might be thinking, well, didn't the Zodiac Killer say that he wouldn't announce his crimes to the public, and he wouldn't tell people the details? He would make them look like routine robberies and accidents, so people wouldn't catch him and they wouldn't stop his collecting of slaves for the afterlife? Yes, the Zodiac Killer did say that, but that statement was made after the Snoozy and Furlong murders. That statement was made after the murder of Paul Stine. So, it really would be odd if the Zodiac did commit the Snoozy and Furlong murders, didn't actually provide any details to the police, when that's his whole thing. That is his whole thing that's going on. And then he's going to just start reshaping and repackaging his gimmick after the Stein murder and then takes credit for the Snoozy and Furlong murders. It is a very bizarre set of behaviors, but it could also be something that we've been talking about over the past few weeks, which is just that the Zodiac Killer is doing confusing things to try and fool the authorities, and he's being very vague on purpose. And I don't necessarily think that that was something that you required an enormous amount of intelligence. You wouldn't necessarily need a Harvard medical degree to think of something like that. So, in terms of the Zodiac's actions and behaviors, he's probably just trolling with this whole thing about the Snoozy and Furlong murders. But I also want to point something out, that the Zodiac Killer is very active in 1969, but Zodiac activity will continue on into 1970. And this might be something that I've neglected with my own observations about the case. For example, if you were to ask me, when did the Zodiac Killer send the Melvin Belli letter? I would say December 20th of 1969. Or like that's the date that's attributed to it. And when did the Zodiac Killer mail the Z13 cipher? And I would be like, April 20th of 1970. Well, what happened in between? And I would say, I don't know. Maybe the Kathleen Johns incident, the attempted abduction off of Highway Route 132. But really, the Zodiac Killer had a very large time gap from December of 1969 to April of 1970. What on earth was the Zodiac doing during that time? Could there be other communications that were authentic that were discarded? Quite possibly. But when you look at the actions and activities of the Zodiac for 1969, he is sending letters in July, in August, and in September of 1969, he wrote a message on a card or made a phone call. I would count that as communication. He made communications in September of 69, October of 69, November, and December. He is mailing letters. So once we get to 1970, the Zodiac starts to slow down a little bit. Could there be a very specific reason for that? Well, I'll let you guys decide in the comments section. But in all seriousness, there could be letters that are authentic that have been discarded. For example, in December of 69, we have the Fairfield letters. I don't personally believe that they are authentic, but some people do, and I have an episode about the Fairfield cipher here on this channel. If anybody hasn't heard that yet, I invite you to listen to it. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these Zodiac Killer discussions. And in final response to this article, I have to give full credit to Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCyphers.com because he has talked about the Zodiac taking credit for the Snoozy and Furlong murders for a very long time. He's made a lot of observations about the Snoozy and Furlong murders, and you can read more about that on ZodiacCyphers.com. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And our first shout-out comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with some of the material for Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio. And if you're curious about that case as well, I invite you to check it out. One more time, Ripper Wednesday here on BBOR. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter. And River Prawn Pottery is also the one who recommended the materials of Dr. Eric Hickey to me, which I'll talk about in just a second. Thank you as well. And of course, we have CZ Guy. CZ Guy is another regular and consistent supporter. CZ Guy, thank you so much for your support. You three have been absolutely amazing. Batman66, River Prawn Pottery, and CZ Guy. It wouldn't feel complete without you. And we have another fairly regular and consistent supporter, and her name is Classic Chevy Cat, who has a donation here on buymeacoffee.com. And this one has a message that says, "Great show today, Ned. While you were talking, this does not pertain to you, but I was thinking about Tom Voigt. Now, I don't particularly care for his bedside manner, but credit where credit is due. If anyone deserves to solve the case, it's him. But your shows are fabulous. I love them all. Thank you so much." Well, Classic Chevy Cat, I really do appreciate that there. And I also shared the material from ZodiacKiller.com in the beginning. And yes, of course, Tom Voigt has put in a lot of work on the case, and I think a lot of people are aware of that. And I just want to thank all of the supporters on BuyMeACoffee.com. You can also use the super chats and super thanks here on YouTube. Now, lately on Black Box Online Radio, I've been doing a segment about the disappearance of Maura Murray from 2004. But this is one where it will go on hiatus for 1 week because tomorrow is October 28th, and I will be doing the Halloween party here on Black Box Online Radio. Normally, once a year, I do a Halloween episode, and this one is definitely going to be more Halloween-focused. Some years in the past, I used to just do straight-up Halloween discussions, and for a couple years, I've done some Zodiac Halloween-related ones. One time I just did a live stream where everybody could talk about what they wanted, and of course people wanted to talk about the Zodiac Killer, and I also did one last year where we were discussing the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card, of course. Sometimes it's a blend, but tomorrow will mostly just be a Halloween episode, so if you want to come in and celebrate Halloween early, please feel free to stop by on Black Box Online Radio. You can listen on October 31st if you want as well, but please join us for the Halloween party here on BBO War. And I told you that River Prawn Pottery had recommended the materials from Dr. Eric Hickey to me. He is the host of the Dark Matters podcast. And when I was listening to that one, Dr. Eric Hickey recommended a particular book and it was called Serial Murderers and Their Victims, and it's one of his ones. And he said if you looked at any of his books, you should look at this one, Serial Murderers and Their Victims. So I decided to do just that. And Dr. Eric Hickey has a sample of this that is available on Amazon.com that everybody can check out. And again, he is a forensic psychologist and criminal psychologist, and he really wants to come at this from an academic perspective. So in this book, you will find some things that I think are very important to discuss, and they are the myths of serial killers. And I'm just going to go through them very fast because, as we're going to see, a lot of this information is very relevant to the Zodiac Killer. Number 1, they are nearly all Caucasians. And it actually states that that's a myth. Not all serial killers are white men, right? No, but this is going to be much more specific. Overall, 1 in 5 serial killers are black, and in recent years, that is actually increasing. And I've noticed this because I release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio that mostly talk about serial killers, true crime news, but any subject under the sun or in the darkness is fair game. And I really began to notice that even when I'm doing shows about serial killers in the United States of America, guess what? They're not all white men. And he's saying that 20% of serial killers are black, and that is not even accounting for other minorities. And also, for example, 17% of serial killers are female, according to Dr. Eric Hickey's book in his section, Myths of a Serial Killer. And yes, 17% of serial killers are female. I can also accept that because when I'm doing the shorts and reels, I find countless stories of serial killers who are female. But I think a major difference is a lot of the female serial killers commit crimes by poisoning, or they're like the ones who orchestrate the events, as opposed to actually committing the violence with a hands-on or sometimes even more violent method. It's still completely wrong, it's still immoral, but that just seems to be a difference. And let's be clear, there are serial killers who commit crimes very physically, female serial killers who commit crimes very physically, but they are few and far between. Myth number 3, they are insane. Insanity is a legal term. Very few offenders are legally insane. In fact, it's 2 to 4%. And what I think he means is not guilty by mental disease or defect. When you grow up in the United States of America and you're watching crime dramas, so many times you will see people trying to use the insanity defense. But in all seriousness, most people are aware of their faculties, and that's really what it's about. You might hear language like, oh, well, did he know right from wrong? No, that's not really what they're talking about. What they mean is, did this person have an awareness, an understanding of their mental faculties? Like, were they aware of their own mind? Did they know what they were doing, or were they in some type of psychotic state where they had absolutely no control over their decision-making and their behaviors, and it all came out in some type of illogical psychotic mess? And that's really what not guilty by mental disease or defect means to me. And Dr. Eric Hickey is saying 2 to 4% of serial killers are legally insane. And myth number 4 is they are all lust killers. Many are, but several cases do not involve sexual assaults, torture, or sexual mutilations. All right, now we are on point with something about the Zodiac Killer. Let me just read that for you again. Many are lust murderers, but several cases do not include sexual assault, torture, or sexual mutilations. All right, look at the actions and activities of the Zodiac Killer. Do you need a bigger example of somebody who did not do these things? I believe that the Zodiac was a sadist. I believe that he enjoyed inflicting pain on the victims and also spreading the image of terror around the San Francisco Bay Area, but he was not a torturer. He did not commit sexual assaults, absolutely not, and he did not commit sexual mutilations, absolutely not. I mean, for anybody to act like that's the way that serial killers functions really doesn't recognize how dynamic serial killer behavior is. Think about everything that I said in regards to the poisoners. All of those female serial killers, they wouldn't be committing sexual assaults or sexual mutilations, and the term torturous could be debatable and all of those issues, but for all intents and purposes, it's not. Now, the next point that we have here is Number 5, the myth of the serial killers. The fifth myth is that serial killers are prolific. Now, a few serial killers have high body counts, but most killers kill fewer than 8 victims. Think about the Zodiac Killer. Did the Zodiac Killer kill 8 people? Well, some people believe that the Zodiac committed 37 murders. And then there are these larger conspiracy theories out there that the Zodiac Killer was involved in 200 murders, 300 murders, 660 murders, 20,000 murders. And it just gets bigger and bigger and it goes out of control. But with the confirmed Zodiac activity, he murdered 5 people. Even if the Zodiac Killer is going to take credit for the Snoozy and Furlong murders, that would only up the body count to 7. And if he murdered Sherry Jo Bates, that would be 8. This is also very typical behavior for the Zodiac. So sometimes it might seem like the Zodiac Killer is being weird. It might seem like he's bizarre. He just doesn't seem like a typical serial killer. Well, when we go through the book of the myths of the serial killers, it actually sounds like the Zodiac is a lot more normal than it seems. And this is something that I've been saying for a long time, and this is something that I know that you know in your heart of hearts, in your deepest convictions, you know this. The Zodiac Killer was not an extraordinary serial killer. All right, he had a symbol, he made these cryptograms, and it got people's attention. He was not dumb. No, the Zodiac Killer was not dumb. He had a fair amount of IQ points. He had a reasonably high IQ. He was somewhat intelligent, somewhat well-read, somewhat connected to books, movies, comic books, music. He had very high trade openness, but was the Zodiac Killer an extraordinary individual? Not really. Did he create a criminal masterpiece? No, not really. It actually sounds like the Zodiac is very, very normal according to the points on this list here. Now, I might be opening up a can of worms with this next one here that says, myth number 6, they kill alone. About 1 in 4 has 1 or more partners in murder. 1 in 4, that's actually some very, very high odds. There was a video made by Bad Things True Crime a couple of years ago that made the bold statement that serial killers frequently work with partners, and everybody was tearing them apart in the comments section. And some of the people who were actually familiar with a lot of stories about serial killers were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. They didn't say that serial killers always have partners. They didn't say that serial killers regularly have partners. They said frequently. That doesn't mean all. That doesn't even mean the majority. And many people were providing other examples of serial killers with partners, whether it's the Boneyard Killers, the Toolbox Killers, or the serial killer from the Midwest, Robert Leroy Anderson, the duct tape killer. He also recruited accomplices. Yes, there are many examples of serial killers with partners. In the Zodiac world, some people will just take this and run with it and be like, all of the differences in the Zodiac crimes could be explained by multiple killers. I was in that camp for a very long time. Like in 2019, 2020, I heavily entertained the possibilities, and I mostly stepped down from them, but I could easily be persuaded one way or the other. So it really goes to show that serial killer partnerships and teams and thrill kill clubs aren't out of the question. But myth number 7 is victims are beaten, stabbed, strangled, or tortured to death. And now this is not exactly a myth. I mean, this says that some victims are poisoned or shot. Well, of course, not every serial killer is going to use the same method. I know that this is trying to dispel myths about serial killers, but is that really a widely held belief that victims are beaten, stabbed, strangled, or tortured to death? Well, yes, serial killers do that, but they can also use other methods like poisoning or shooting. Can you think of a serial killer that shot the victims? Well, how about the Zodiac Killer? Again, I don't even really think that number 7 is a widely held belief. For people who closely follow true crime programs and who follow the stories of serial killers in cases like the Zodiac Killer, they don't believe that stuff. Number 8. Serial killers are all very intelligent. That's a myth. Most are of average intelligence. Oh, yes, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, you don't have to be of above average intelligence to be a serial killer, and there are many cases of serial killers who are of below average intelligence. What do? They murder people in vulnerable places. Sometimes they start out by committing sexual assaults, and the behaviors escalate to murder. and they're going after people in low-income areas who are very vulnerable. They offer them drugs, then they commit SA, and then they murder them. It's terrible, terrible stuff, but there are numerous cases of serial killers with low IQs. So I'm not surprised about that myth there. But then myth number 9, they have high mobility in the United States. Oh, and most offenders remain in a local area. I would think so, but with the Zodiac Killer, this is one where I'm genuinely undecided on. I've been trying to take some strong stances in this episode, but I'm not convinced that the Zodiac remained in one local area. Another person who is not convinced is Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. He thinks the Zodiac started out in Southern California and specifically chose geographic points due to calculation. Then he moved north to the Bay Area and Vallejo in 1968 and 69. It's entirely possible that the Zodiac Killer was committing crimes in different areas and that he was very mobile. And what's the exact word here? That he had high mobility. I mean, you could really interpret this either way, and you can let me know in the comment section down below. Do you think the Zodiac Killer stayed in one place? Like, do you think he was a Vallejo resident and he stayed in Vallejo? Do you think he started in Southern California, moved to Northern California? Do you think it's something like the series Night Sins that I've talked about in the past, where everything was plotted out and planned and designed? They're going to choose specific locations so it won't be traced back to them in the movie Night Sins. It's actually a miniseries with Valerie Bertinelli and a young Olivia Benson, also known as Mariska Hargitay. But in terms of plotting and planning, that would be something that's very mobile and done across multiple jurisdictions. Let me know what you think. And number 12, most serial killers want to be caught. And the myth dispelled here is, like anyone, they learn and gain confidence from experience. Many want to be serial killers, end up in prison after their first murder. Well, a clear case in point of that would be Brian Koberger, someone who most likely wanted to be a serial killer. It's just he got busted, and DNA testing is going to slow down so many people. The next myth would be, most serial killers cannot stop killing. Some serial killers stopped killing for several years before they killed again or were caught, including Dennis Rader, Jeffrey Gordon, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Ted Kaczynski. Such offenders are often substitute paraphilic behaviors or other diversions in lieu of killing. Well, what about the Zodiac Killer? Does the Zodiac Killer not fall into that category? So many people are asking this question. Why did the Zodiac stop murdering after Paul Stine? Some people would simply say that he didn't. It's that he wanted to transition into becoming an abductor. He tried to abduct Kathleen Johns. It failed. So then he tried more successfully to abduct Donald Lass, and he succeeded. And then he became an abductor and committed murders for the rest of his life. Other people think that, it's just a myth that serial killers cannot stop killing. Countless people that I've talked to have a Zodiac Killer suspect, and they say, well, I think that he was just committing murders until the day he died. Now that's a myth, according to Dr. Eric Hickey, and of course it is. Some serial killers have very small range of terror. Some serial killers have very small periods of operation and periods of activity. It's entirely possible that the Zodiac stopped killing after October 11th of 1969 because something changed within him. Something happened. Some people think that he was scared of getting caught after the Stine murder, but maybe, according to this book, he found a new obsession. And it's also possible that that new obsession was simply writing letters, that became more exhilarating than committing the murders. And as Richard Grinnell would say, he had already captivated everyone's attention, so why not commit the crimes in a more discreet way? Why not just do this obstruction of justice stuff by mailing in letters, which has a much lower chance of being traced back to him, especially in 1969. The next myth is that serial killers are psychopaths. Lots of serial killers are. Absolutely. That's not a pure myth. That's just, why don't we just say that not all serial killers are psychopaths? If you want to put a myth out there, I think it should be phrased as all serial killers are psychopaths. That would be the myth, but yes, lots of serial killers are psychopaths. Let's keep going here. Some serial killers are true psychopaths while others possess psychopathic traits. Perfect. And I know Dr. Hickey's aware of that. He's a criminal psychologist, but it's just the way it's phrased in the book. Several high body count serial killers have PCLR evaluated, do not qualify as psychopaths. Oh yes, of course, and one of the most famous examples was John Wayne Gacy. Was the Zodiac Killer a psychopath? I think absolutely yes. When I read books about profiling and the actions and behaviors of psychopathic serial killers, the Zodiac is doing all the stuff, treating the human beings like they're just objects, just leaving the bodies where they are, acting like there's not an ounce of humanity in them. Those are all psychopathic and sociopathic traits. And the next one here is, serial killers have a prototype. They vary in race, this is the rebuttal, they vary in race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, age, gender, IQ, and education. So I think the overall point and takeaway from this book by Dr. Eric Hickey is that not all serial killers are the same. Not all serial killers act and behave in the same way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with anything that he has said here. Sometimes the phrasing is a little bit awkward, and I did pull up one or two myths that I don't necessarily think that people actually have. But overall, though, I'm mostly on point with that. You can let me know about any of the comments that I have made about the Zodiac Killer, and what do you think about the statements from Dr. Eric Hickey, and please put your ideas in the comments section down below. And moving on to the next segment here on Zodiac Monday, I would like to continue with the book Flirting with the Executioner by Gerald Gregory Doan. And this is a book that is going to expand upon the material from his previous book, One Night in October. And Gerald Gregory Doan has made a lot of commentary statements about the Zodiac Killer's actions and activities. But we are approaching Halloween, and the title Flirting with the Executioner made me think of the Zodiac Killer costume. And this year, I started a segment here on Black Box Online Radio called Dahlia Thursday. And there is a channel out there that is run by Larry Harnish that focuses on the Black Dahlia, and he puts out a disclaimer on almost all of his recent episodes saying, please don't dress up as the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Please don't dress up as a murder victim. So I'm just echoing his sentiments, and I completely agree with him that that would be a poor taste thing to do. I've also seen other examples in the past of when people dress up as murder victims. I repeat, victims for Halloween, and I don't agree with it at all. But other than that, everybody have a wonderful Halloween and stay safe, and please tune in for the Halloween party here on Black Box Online Radio, as well as checking out the new Dahlia Thursday segment that comes out every week. Now, I've talked about some of Gerald Gregory Doan's observations in the past, but I really like how he has divided his book, Flirting with the Executioner, into different sections. And some of the sections talk about the things that we're going to pick up with exactly where we've left off from the beginning in the episode. And that is that the Zodiac Killer continued to write letters into 1970, and one of them was the Kathleen Johns reference letter. That's what it's called here in the book. And I'm going to have a read from Gerald Gregory Doan's book, Flirting with the Executioner, the Kathleen Johns letter. Zodiac threatened to develop a list of future victims because the public wouldn't wear his buttons. What a jerk. The reference is a list, and it is another use of the term taken from the comic opera The Mikado, which the Zodiac had used previously. Zodiac's claim that he was with a lady and a baby obviously refers to the March 22, 1970 incident in Stanislaus County with Kathleen Johns near Modesto 4 months earlier. Well, I do completely agree with that because I don't really think there's any doubt in my mind that that's what the Zodiac was talking about. This woman who claimed that she was abducted by the Zodiac, he's not being specific with her name or features about her, but the fact that he stated that she had a baby with her, which was true, it tells me that he's talking about Kathleen Johns. Let's keep going. Zodiac had previously listed details of a crime to validate his involvement in that crime. In this case, he does not go into the specifics, only generalities that could have been from a news report. Well, that's the whole issue. I mean, the Zodiac did say, though, that he wasn't going to give precise information anymore. And has he just evolved into a form of trolling? Did he just realize that he can be very vague about stuff and it won't be traced back to him? Let's look at some things that the Zodiac Killer possibly did. Maybe he's alluding, I repeat, alluding to the fact that he committed the Snoosian Furlong murders. He's alluding to it, but not confessing to it. he's making an allusion to committing the Kathleen Johns incident, or maybe another crime like the murder of Donna Lass. And he's just being very, very vague about this stuff. Okay, here's a better one. How about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates? Because in 1971, he's going to say that you've stumbled upon my Riverside activity. So after October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac is just dropping these little hints and indirect statements that he has committed these murders and committed these crimes, but it's entirely possible that he is just lying. Did he just take that up as a habit? Was that the new idea that took over him? Was that the substitute? Like, did he substitute murder with just lying and trolling in the letters? Was that just equally stimulating for him? Did that help him spread the image of terror more thoroughly because then people were so confused? I think that could be a very, very defendable claim in sequence. But let's keep going here with the book. Was the Zodiac running out of murdering gas? Nevertheless, we included the Stanislaus County crime as one of the Zodiac's crimes, ranging it as possible to doubtful. Okay, that means that Gerald Gregory Doan says that it's possible but doubtful that the murder of Kathleen Johns was committed by the Zodiac, which is very surprising because when I read his book one night in October, I was under the impression that he believed that the Kathleen Johns incident was definitely authentic. Was the Zodiac running out of murdering gas? Well, I'm not completely convinced that he was running out of murdering gas. I mean, maybe that is what I said, though, that he no longer had the desire to kill and that he wanted to do something else. Something else had taken place, substitute murdering gas with a different type of stimulant, if you will. Fair enough. I mean, this is a metaphorical statement, so we can interpret it in different ways. Did the Zodiac simply run out of energy? I don't think so. Did the Zodiac simply just decide that he didn't want to kill anymore on a whim? I don't think so. I think that there was a very specific reason why he chose to stop, but it might be something that isn't very extraordinary. It's just he wanted to write letters more. Other people believe he was scared of getting caught. Other people believe that it was all calculated. How about that theory? Putting the points on a map so he could get specific lines drawn, specific angles, and he had a very specific reason for committing the murders in the first place. So that wouldn't be running out of murdering gas. That would mean that he had a specific reason why he was doing this. Next, we have the Little List letter. The Zodiac continued to use threats of harm because the public would not do as he instructed them to do. The threats were nonspecific and strange. Well, that's what the Zodiac is doing in 1970. That's what the Zodiac is doing in November of 69 and onwards, making threats that are nonspecific and strange. Why? Because he wants to confuse the public. Well, where did he get an idea like that? From movies, books, and comic books. I mean, the 1940s and 50s and 60s were filled with sources like that. He's just ripping off other people's ideas. Zodiac used deception and camouflage in his letters. He no longer seemed interested in committing homicides, but continued to vent his angst and frustration toward the public and the police as a deception ploy. I agree. Either the Stein murder was the Zodiac's narrow escape at capture, or something else in his life caused a change in his homicidal behavior. This is why I love Gerald Gregory Doan's books, because him and I are mostly in agreement on the hard points. We might have different views about the suspects, but about this stuff, it's spot on. The Zodiac has an aviation surveying or mapping background, referring to Mount Diablo and concerning radians and inches along the radians. Entirely possible, I wouldn't dispute that either. But the Zodiac said that he had a little list, and he wrote the Little List letter. I've got a little list is from the Mikado, a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, and this and other letters have references to the Mikado as well. Absolutely, they do. Zodiac had a connection to the theater, specifically the Mikado. He was a reader, listener, or patron. Now that's a theoretical statement, that's a hypothesis. I'm not convinced for a second that the Zodiac had a connection to the theater. Maybe, that could be a reasonable possibility. But overall, I think that the Zodiac might have been someone who was just sitting at home by himself listening to the Mikado on the record player. Maybe it wasn't even the theatrical version, or it wasn't even the traditional version. Maybe it was the Groucho Marx version of the Mikado. Something that he would listen to by himself in a one-bedroom apartment. But there is another card that we have to talk about in this episode, and that is the Halloween card, because this episode is coming out on October 27th, and we are just days away from Halloween. And the Halloween card, also known as the Paul Avery card, well, I don't think many people call it that. The Halloween card contained the words fire, knife, gun, and rope, and it was to authenticate the postcard as being legitimate from the Zodiac. Well, I think the Halloween card was legitimate. I think the Halloween card was authentic, and I think almost everybody believes that the Halloween card was authentic, other than the rare exception. On the Halloween card, the Zodiac claimed 14 victims, and his claim was unverifiable and most likely bogus. Well, as we've seen from everything so far, the Zodiac may have just been taking credit for murders that he didn't commit, and one theory that has also been talked about is it was a direct threat to Paul Avery, and Paul Avery was supposed to be the 14th victim. Donna Lass may have been 12, and Paul Avery was 14. The illustration, with the eyes on the fence, and elsewhere related to the claim of a 14th victim, the winged V with serif stood for Valhalla, another Norse pagan symbol of the afterlife. Now, this is something where Gerald Gregory Doan is getting very specific because his Zodiac Killer suspect was named Kjell Kavale. And Kavale was a Norwegian American, so we have a Dutch American today, Dr. Joost, and we also have Kjell Kavale of Norwegian descent. A lot of people from Europe get accused of being the Zodiac Killer, so it seems. This was a Halloween card with little purpose except to distract from Zodiac's identity. Well, not only that, that's not the only purpose of the Halloween card. It's also to make the threat to Paul Avery, or it's designed to scare Paul Avery. It literally says boo in the center of the Halloween card. I mean, yes, it's designed to scare Paul Avery. So says me anyway. Again, that's a hypothetical statement. And one thing that I was talking about wonderfully on last year's Halloween episode was that the Zodiac Killer may have been responding to the news coverage about a different murderer in the area. There was the murder of Jacqueline Truss that was committed by rope, by knife, by gun, and by fire, and that crime was even not being attributed to the Zodiac Killer. The murder of Jackie Truss was listed as being committed in a Jack the Ripper style. San Francisco's Jack the Ripper. And again, citing Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com, because he's always on top of things, he was pointing out that the Zodiac Killer may have been responding to that because he didn't want to be upstaged by a different serial killer. He was the one who's supposed to be San Francisco's Jack the Ripper, not San Francisco's actual Jack the Ripper. So instead, this could be something that is that actually has a very different meaning than what's listed in this book, Flirting with the Executioner. There were no threats, no ciphers, and no suspect identification offered. It was just a Halloween card that said Paul Avery instead of Paul Avery, and the eyes on the card could also be bullet holes rather than eyes. Well, wouldn't that also indicate that it was a threat? I mean, what do you think about that? And I know that the Halloween card is very complex. I know that the Halloween card is something that people will spend a lifetime trying to decode and solve. And of course, there are the B.D. Holland books out there, Zodiac Killer Super Solution, that go greatly into this. And I've also done numerous episodes on the Zodiac Killer Halloween card here on this channel, on lots of Zodiac Mondays, and I invite you to check out some older episodes. Feel free to go through some of the material. Also tune in tomorrow for the Halloween party episode. And that will be all for me on this week's Zodiac Monday. You can also get this show on the podcast circuit, anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast, and it is available for free downloads there. And as previously stated, I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. I have a Facebook page called Black Box Online Radio, blackboxonlineradio88 on Instagram. You guys know where to write the show. And of course, you know about buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio88. And that will conclude this week's Zodiac Monday. If I don't see you at the Halloween party, everybody have a safe and wonderful Halloween. There are also numerous Halloween episodes that have been made over the years on Black Box Online Radio. Feel free to check out some of the other content if you just want to hang out for a little bit. Or if you're going out to celebrate with your friends and family, have a wonderful and safe Halloween, you're giving candy out to the trick-or-treaters, then I hope you have a good time with that as well. Everybody have an amazing week, and I'll see you in the future. For now, Goodbye.